कृपया अपनी कुर्सी की पेटी बांध लीजिए।
Quick and easy education loans from Bank of Baroda. Power your dreams today.
Festember is proud to present the next episode in our Carpe Diem interview series. Today, we have with us two prominent authors of the modern literary world, Mr. Christopher Doyle and Ms. Cathy Cassidy.
So, Mr. Doyle and Ms. Cassidy, welcome to the show.
Thank you. Thank you. It's lovely to be here.
Thank you. It's great to be here.
Thank you for joining us. So CRY, which is short for Child Rights and You, is a 41-year-old Indian non-government organization that works towards ensuring happier childhoods for all children across various states in India. CRY works on various issues like child labor, child marriage, trafficking, malnourishment, and school dropouts, among various other issues that violate a child's right to education, survival, participation, and protection. We all know that this pandemic has affected each and every one of us, but the most affected people are the children of our country and their families, especially the ones from marginalized communities.
The statistics on child labor, marriage, trafficking, and malnourishment are already high, and owing to the pandemic, they pose a risk of increasing, which is why we need your support right now. Do your part and donate today to provide a safe and fulfilling childhood that every child deserves, regardless of their background and stature. The donation link is available on all our social media handles, so please do check them out.
Now, without further ado, let's get to the interview. Mr. Doyle is an author who transports his readers into a fascinating world of ancient secrets and legends blended together with science and history. Ms. Cassidy is loved throughout by kids. Her books are brilliant for young adult readers. Her work also deals with the issues faced by children while growing up.
In your previous interviews, the interviewers must have asked you to introduce yourself before proceeding with the questions. This time, for a change, we thought we'd ask you to introduce yourselves the way you've always wanted to be introduced. Ms. Cassidy?
Okay, I'm Cathy Cassidy. I am thrilled to be here. India is one of the places I have most wanted to visit in my life and never have. So even if it's just in a Zoom interview, I'm really happy to be there in Zoom, if nothing else. And I write books for older children and young adults, as you said. So cool, thank you.
Thank you, ma'am.
Mr. Doyle?
Okay, thanks. Thank you for the opportunity to introduce myself. It's great. And so I'm, I guess you could call me someone who likes to poke around in history and try to find unsolved mysteries or questions left in the historical record, the gaps in the historical record. And I try to fill those gaps using fiction, using science. And since India has such a rich mythological heritage, I like to collect mythology, our mythology, to what I write about as well. So that's where, it's about how ancient legends can come to life in today's world. And that's what I do.
Mm-hmm.
Thank you, sir. So we'll move on with the questions. It's a surprising coincidence that both of your careers have been influenced by children. How do you perceive your writing would be for them? And what would you like them to take away from your stories?
So, yeah. Ms. Cassidy?
Okay. I don't know why I write for children. I don't know why I write for this particular age group. It's just the way the stories come out. But I think with hindsight, it's really, I feel very honored to write for young people because I made a bit of a mess of being a child and a teenager. I made a lot of mistakes. I got a lot of things wrong. I worried about an awful lot of things. And I feel that perhaps the stories that I write can help kids to avoid some of those mistakes and to find, to find out how family of all shapes and sizes and friendship and love and kind of, believing in the good stuff really can actually help you through difficult times. So although it wasn't particularly, you know, it wasn't a plan to kind of, oh, I must write for children. I always thought I'd be writing for adults. It's just come out a different way. But I think your voice reflects what you need to write. So that's just the way it's happened. And my readers are the best people in the world. So yeah, I love them wherever they are.
Thank you. And so, Mr. Doyle, what about you?
So my case was a bit interesting because I've always wanted to write since I was a kid. I used to write in school stories right from, you know, when I could start writing, and I always wanted to be a published author, but never got around to doing it. I got involved in the corporate sector with work professionally, and then when my daughter was 7, I used to tell her stories when she was when she was 3 years old. I used to make up stories for her rather than read out at bedtime. And when she was 7, I started writing this story, which eventually became my first book. Having said that, it was very interesting because when the book had to be published, it had to be converted from being a tale told for a child into you know, something with a wider appeal. And I didn't really have any specific audience in mind, so to speak. But it was interesting to find that a lot of young readers were sending me emails and telling me which grade they were in school and how much they liked the book, or, you know, pointing out parts of the book. And I said, wow, you know, I didn't really expect this, because none of the characters in those books were anything less than 28 or 30 years old. So I didn't even think people would connect with older characters, but something was happening there. And that actually inspired me to come out with the second series, which I came out with in 2018. And that actually had 2 teenagers as the protagonists. And that was, you know, aimed at younger readers. Because I think I totally, you know, what Cathy said totally resonates with me as well. I think if there is, today's children have go through so much. I mean, it's the world today is very different from what it was when we were growing up. And there is so much more happening that it's very easy to, you know, to make mistakes. And if in some way we as authors can help children to find their way, I think it's great. I really feel great when I've had kids come up to me and say, you know, I read your book and I realized what I wanted to do in my higher studies. It feels so satisfying, should I say? You know, it's really amazing.
Books have always been a treat for all the readers, sir. I personally vouch for that.
Thank you.
So, Miss Cathy, the next question is for you. Your novels usually talk about important themes for young people like isolation and bullying. Why do you think it's important that young people know about such sensitive topics?
I think people have asked me this before, but actually I think that young people know about those things because they live those things. There's very few kids who haven't been teased at the very, very least at school, but some kids are bullied quite horribly at different points, you know, and kids feel lonely, whether they have good reason to, because they really are isolated and in, you know, in some kind of jeopardy, or whether or not they just feel that way. You know, these are human emotions that we all share, and children feel them very strongly. And I think sometimes if you are one of those people who feels things intensely, it can be very scary, especially if you're still a child. Something's going on in your world, perhaps with your family, perhaps with what's going on in the world around you, as you know, as it is right now for all of us at this time of pandemic. I mean, that's quite, you know, a huge anxiety and worry for kids. And I think it's wrong just to, you know, when you're writing for older children or for teenagers, I think it's wrong to pretend that the world is a certain way, where everything is perfect and nothing ever goes wrong, because that's not going to help you. a lot of the problems that kids come across in their lives, they're not caused by kids, they're caused by the adults around them, the world around them. But you feel as a child that you have very few ways of trying to change or alter that, and very few ways of making a happy ending for yourself. And my books, I suppose, are a way of, they're a way of showing that there are ways you can get through those difficult times. And even, you know, there are not necessarily happy endings for all these difficult things, but there are certainly things that you can do that will help you get through. And those things, to me, I think friendship and family, and kindness and looking after other people. So, you know, reaching out and trying to help others. And those are themes that run through all of my books. And it's weird to answer that question because those are not the reasons that I started to write. They're just the things that come out. They just come out naturally. But I do think it's really important. Don't put barriers down and say you can't write about this difficult thing for children because it might upset them. The children know already that, you know, the kids will know these things already. They're dealing with these things already, or they've seen their friends going through similar things, you know, so we mustn't underestimate young people at all. And I just think, yeah, it gives respect to young people to actually meet them on their level. And yeah, I think.
Well, thank you so much. Mr. Doyle, the next question is for you. So when you're dealing with mythological subjects, a lot of writers tend to ignore the inclusion of science. And so how do you approach the juxtaposition of science and mythology together in your narrative or in your plot?
So that's a great question, because it's one of the reasons why I started writing what I write. There was less science in the very first story I told my daughter. I had to deepen the science when it became a book. But for me, a lot of reading that I did over, say, the last 20 or 25 years exposed me to a lot of very interesting facts which I didn't know about. So one of the things was a lot of research which I'd seen in the Western world, looking at Western mythology and scientific explanations. In fact, there's actually a very good book called The Science of Magic, which I think was written by one of the science editors of The Economist newspaper, if I'm not mistaken. But there are books like this, and there's a classic called Hamlet's Mill, which was published, I think, about 50 or 60 years ago, which explores the role of astronomy in world mythology. And India has about 8 pages in a book which is about 600 pages. So I kind of found a vacuum where India was concerned. We've got such a rich mythological heritage, but I couldn't find anyone who was writing about the science. And there's a scientific heritage in India that stretches back thousands of years. We had surgeons like Sushruta, for example, who practiced a plastic surgery technique called forehead flap rhinoplasty. That's what we call it today. And it's in a Sanskrit text attributed to him from about 800 BC. So there's a lot of this which I came across in my reading, in my research, and I figured that if no one's writing about it, why shouldn't I? But then because I'm, I don't want to make connections where they don't exist, I decided to use fiction, because then I could use facts and make the connections, which are of a fictional nature. So that one of the things I don't want to do is to disguise fiction as nonfiction and say this is the truth, because then you're misleading people. And especially now that I've got a fairly large proportion of my readership is young people. They tend to take what the facts that you present for them as the gospel truth, and one has to take responsibility to give them the facts and not and not mislead them. So that's why I wanted to write fiction, because I thought the connections were interesting to explore, And I always wanted people to start thinking about, what if we could actually see a bit of science in mythology, and that's where the whole approach in my books came from.
So thank you so much for your answer. Again, now I'm addressing you both. Let's start with you, Miss Cassidy. So I mean, where do you imagine yourself to be today if you hadn't taken up writing as a full-time career?
That's a really good question. It's so hard to know. But at the point where I started writing, I'd done a lot of interesting things. I'd worked on a teenage magazine, so I'd been a journalist. I was selling short stories as a freelance journalist while I was bringing my children up, I'd also been an agony aunt, and I don't know if you have that in India. It's the person on a magazine who answers questions that the readers will send in, so that was also for a teen magazine. I'd also been an art teacher. So I've done quite a lot of different jobs even up until that point. And now it's kind of interesting because pandemic times, and it's, you feel, well, are things going to change, or do I keep doing the same thing? What do I do? What happens if nobody wants books anymore? I don't know. I don't think that will happen. But, I think if I had to create a new career for myself now, perhaps I'd be a craft worker, or, I'm interested in painting and making things. I'm also quite interested in animals, so maybe some sort of animal rescue. Those are all things that were on my list of things to do long ago. So yeah, could have been any of those things.
Yeah, well, that's a really colorful answer. So what about you, Mr. Doyle? Where do you imagine yourself to be if you hadn't taken up writing as a full-time career?
Well, I think that's probably a simpler question for me to answer, because I'm not a full-time writer. I write part-time, and my day job is running my coaching and consulting business. So I guess I would just do that full-time if I was not writing. It's now my time gets divided between the two, but that's where I'd be. I'd just be doing what I do professionally as a coach and consultant.
So do you see yourself transitioning to full-time writing in the future, or not really?
I have, honestly, I have mixed thoughts about it. I love writing. I'm very passionate about it. And sometimes I'm afraid that if I allow it to become my bread and butter, that if I'm going to be dependent on that for my income, am I going to lose some of that passion? Will it become, I think Cathy would know this better. She's doing this full time, but there's always that apprehension that, if I'm writing to a deadline, I don't write to deadlines. My publishers are great that way. If I had to produce 3 books a year, will I be compromising on my research or on my writing? Those apprehensions are there. So I'm not really sure. Right now I have the luxury of saying, I love writing. I'm passionate about it. I'll do it when I can, and I enjoy it. So I don't know.
Well, thank you. Thank you so much for your answer.
Cassidy, I have a question for you. Your art has always been as amazing as your writing, and it's always prominent in your books. How did you develop this love for art, and what would be your favorite illustration that you've drawn so far?
It's quite difficult. I actually went to art college. I trained to be an illustrator, and at that point in my life, I thought, I'd love to publish books one day. Maybe I could write and illustrate a book. And the very first things I did were attempts to do that, but it never really got off the ground. I ended up doing a lot of illustration work, for children's workbooks, like for maths books and things in school, and that wasn't my idea of fun particularly. So it's funny to me that the creativity came out in words in the end, and the words are clearly my media really, but I can't not draw and I can't not paint, and it's really hard to there's artwork at the top of some of the chapters in the books that I write, tiny little vignettes, which was fun to do. But some of the things that I like best aren't really line drawings like that. If I dive out of screen, I can show you one. Sorry about that. Sitting on there's picture of a girl and a fox, which
Oh, that's really beautiful.
which was on a magazine cover 20, 30 years ago, maybe. Yeah, and that means a lot to me because it's about being vegetarian and it's about being kind to the earth and animals. That was the magazine it was for. So if you asked me for a favorite one, I would pick that because I could almost reach it. But yeah, I also, even as an adult now, I absolutely adore illustrated books, and I buy a lot of picture books, and I love them. And I remember very, very vividly being in a library when I was about 10 with my little brother who was about 5, and I was looking through a picture book, and my brother got bored and wandered away, but I loved this picture book, and the librarian came and said, "What's a great big girl like you doing looking at a baby book?" And I'm like, it's not, you know, and I feel really, really passionately that, you know, pictures are just as important as words, and we should never make somebody feel sad or ashamed for connecting with the pictures.
And how would you prefer to draw? Do you like the classic pencil and paper, or do you like digital art more?
Absolutely, the classic pencil and paper. I love crayons, paint. The messier it is, the better. I tried for a while. In the 90s, I was still selling illustrations to magazines because I did everything I could think of to try and make some money, you know. Never really made very much, but I did try the digital thing. It wasn't for me. It just kind of, yeah, it's not for me. It's not my style, but yeah.
The messier, the better pictures came out for you.
So next question again is for you, Mr. Doyle. So you talked about putting science and mythology together, but in general, when you have a mythological story or a legend and you have to make it work in the modern day, how do you do that? So not just in terms of science, but also in terms of the modern mindset or the modern way of thinking. How do you modernize a mythological story or legend to make a compelling plot? And would you say that there are any limits to that modernization so that you can still preserve the story?
Well, actually, it works in different ways in the different books I write. So there's one book where one series where I use hardcore science. So when I say hardcore, it's I try not to get too technical, but for me, the science is actually the link between our contemporary world and the ancient world of mythology. India is one place where our mythology is alive. You know, unlike say Greek, Egyptian, Roman mythology, which are, you know, they're gone. India is one place where there's a very strong belief in the truth behind a lot of the myths, and therefore it's in some ways trying to connect this live reality of ancient times, which has an undercurrent in our contemporary world, with the way we live. And I use science to make that connection. I use science also because like I mentioned earlier, there are there's a lot of evidence of science in ancient times, and it's not just in India; it's around the world. When you look at, you know, whether you look at the Greeks or the Romans or the Persians, and you come back to India and you see what was happening over here. There was science in ancient times. There's science today, and I use that as a link really to bring it to bring the story together. The other series which I released in 2018 is more towards fantasy. So I explain some of the fantasy elements using science. You know, so for example, when you're using a mantra to say create light, for example, you're really using quantum mechanics, and that's the explanation, the scientific explanation, which is scientific fact. You know. So those are some of the connections that I use to try and link our contemporary worlds to mythology.
Okay, thank you so much. That was a very creative answer.
Very interesting too, like
Yeah.
the way you connect science with mythology. So I have a question for both of you. We all know that a lot of writing requires heavy research, especially while writing for young and growing audiences. It calls for a keen eye on language, visuals, pacing, details, etc. How would you describe your writing process to be? And did the pandemic upend any of your writing mantras?
So, Mr. Doyle, let's start with you.
So, so for me, I think the research is is extremely important for a number of reasons. Now, the first is if I'm writing about mythology, I want to stick to what is actually there in the ancient texts. And since they're all in Sanskrit and I don't know Sanskrit, I have a team of PhDs in Sanskrit who help me with the interpretations. I have my wacky ideas, which I keep bouncing off them. I get slapped on the wrist at times for, for transcending certain boundaries, which I shouldn't be. But it's all good fun. And I've got Vedic scholars who bring the spiritual and religious aspects so that I'm not stepping, I'm not stepping on anyone's toes or offending anyone, even inadvertently. I don't want to do that. So these are some of the most sensitive parts of the research. But when I look at history, for example, or the science has to be real. While I'm writing a story where the connections between science and mythology are fictional. So when I'm explaining the Samudra Manthan, for example, where the gods and the asuras they churn the
The
ocean,
snake, yeah, with the snake.
yeah, with the snake, and the nectar of immortality came out. It's a great myth, but can science actually explain it? And to my surprise, when I was doing my research, there's actually a very interesting scientific explanation that can fit in. So there, I take the help of scientists like the regional director of the WHO. He helped me with. He's retired now. He was a virologist, and he helped me with some of the technical aspects. I put forward a hypothesis. And I said, you don't have to agree with what I'm saying because I'm writing fiction, but I want the science to be correct. So there's a lot of work that needs to go into getting the science right. I'm not a science student. I did economics and then I did my management. I left science in my 10th grade. So a lot of the white papers I read, they go right over my head. So a lot of time has to go in that. So for me, that is really the core for any book that I write. And I tend to find that if I get all of this right, the story somehow emerges. It just comes. So it makes the whole writing process much easier.
So, Ms. Cassidy, what about you?
I think probably my way of writing is different, and it's perhaps because I have neither mythology usually or science to weave into the story, although sometimes I might have a little bit of either, I don't know. But most of the time it's the story, the idea of the characters that drives the story. So I'll think of a character, I'll think of a story start, and what I do is jump right in. And I kind of imagine the story as though it's a daydream that runs through my imagination. It's like a kind of a controlled daydream, if that makes sense. So you're visualizing those characters, and occasionally they'll do things that are quite surprising. And research is needed, certainly is, but that tends to happen along the way. The story always comes first and drives itself along. And as it does, I might think, right, I actually need to find out if that's possible. And if that's not possible, what might be? So I need to go and research that. But the story can't get derailed. So that always is more important. And then once I have a first draft written, then I'll make sure that that everything does add up and that everything is able to fit together, and that no one's gonna write in and say, no, that couldn't have happened, or no, you can't see that here, or that is the wrong thing, or the wrong word, or the wrong whatever. So you have to make it balanced. But I think perhaps because of the different styles or genres of stories that we write, my method is different to Christopher's, but it's really interesting to see how another author works. It's great.
Has the pandemic affected your writing process in any manner? Has the current pandemic affected your writing?
Yeah, actually, it's made it a little bit more difficult, I would say. It's, I think it's, for me, it's because it's taken away. Normally, I would be out and about meeting readers. I would be doing book signings, going to schools and talking to kids. That's how we kind of, that's just what we do. And I haven't had that. So there's no direct feedback. It's all online. And that's quite hard, I think. It feels like somebody's taken those readers away, even though I know they're still there, they're still messaging, they're still emailing and writing and everything. But it does feel a little bit sad. I do miss that. And also, I think it just seems hard to write when you're feeling a little bit sad. And particularly now, we're in full lockdown in the UK at the moment, and we've been told it's going to go on until the middle of March at the very, very earliest. That's, you know, at least. And, you know, we've had snow, we've had ice, we've had very, very cold weather. You can't always get out and walk if it's really kind of cold or dangerous to walk because of the ice or whatever. And that means it is quite hard sometimes. You're not seeing other people, you can't see your friends, you can't even see your family a lot of the time. I'm lucky that I have my husband that I'm locked down with and dogs and so on, but it definitely affects all of us. But it's also nice. The pandemic has done one positive thing for me, because it's made me conquer my terror of things like YouTube and Zoom, which, you know, I would have been absolutely petrified to do an event like this, you know, before the pandemic. But because I had readers emailing me and messaging me from all around the world, actually saying, oh, we miss your books, how can we get hold of your books, we're locked down here in the Philippines or here in such a place, you know, wherever it is. And I started reading some of my books online on a little YouTube, my personal YouTube channel, which is only little and had never been used for anything really. And at the moment I'm reading Sunday Girl, this one, and it's like a free, you know, a chapter a day through this particular bit of pandemic. So it's good because it makes you conquer some of your fears, you know, and that little YouTube channel is a way of staying close to those readers.
Quick and easy car loans from Bank of Baroda, so that your dreams don't have to wait.
So that's been cool.
So, Mr. Doyle? Yeah.
So yeah, so I know what Cathy's talking about when it comes to going to schools, meeting kids, because I do that a lot, or I used to do that a lot before March last year. And as much as my work would allow me to travel, and sometimes if I was traveling to a different city for work, I'd add on a couple of days and visit a few schools and interact with the kids there. So so that is definitely something that I am missing. It's that energy, that connect with the readers is an online video conference really cannot replace that at all. So that's there. What's also set me back, I was actually supposed to release a book last year in November, and I always like to do ground research for all my books. So when I wrote the Secret of the Druids, for example, I spent about 5 weeks in the UK, and I think I visited more than 100 archaeological sites in the UK, right up to the Orkney Islands, to get on the ground, so to speak. And in middle of March, I was scheduled to fly out. I can't tell you which country it is, otherwise it'll be a spoiler for people who are watching, who are waiting for that book to come out. But I was supposed to go for a 10-day trip. I had booked the archaeologists because I work with, wherever I go, I normally engage archaeologists for a fee, and to get the authentic information on the sites I'm visiting. So I had this 10-day itinerary all planned out, hotels booked, archaeologists booked, transport booked, and then 3 days before I was supposed to fly out, the WHO said pandemic, and then the travel ban started. So that book went for a toss. Publishers were great. They said, okay, you know, what are you going to do? And I said, give me some time. If I can go in September, I'll still give you the book, but maybe later. and then September never really happened. So I had to alter course and come up with a totally new plot, because I made a commitment to my publisher that I will give you a book by February. I will give you the manuscript, and we will release it by July or August this year. And I have readers who've been waiting for this book, and when, like, you can't just go back and say, hey, you know, because of the pandemic, you've got to wait for a couple of years more. So these are things which have really taken some of the joy away from being an author. On the flip side, however, I think it's one of the good things that's happened is I have a club for possibly my most hardcore readers who like my books. It's called the Quest Club, and we are about a community which is about 15,000 strong around the world. And one of the things which I was always upset about was that I couldn't meet so many people. I couldn't really interact with them except via email. And I was like Cathy, though for work I use a lot of Zoom, but somehow for my books and meeting readers, it was always the, you know, let's meet you in person. But there's a limit to how many cities I could travel to. What's really amazing is we've done Quest Club meetings instead of physical meetings. We've done online meetings last year through the pandemic. And I've had people from all over the world participate in those meetings. They last for 3 hours. You know, you have 100 people, 3 hours. It's mind-boggling. And we're discussing all kinds of things: mythology, history, conspiracy theories, all kinds of stuff. It's really exciting. Now that would be very, very difficult to replicate in the physical world. So the pandemic has had some good things happen as well.
Mm-hmm. So
It's to see that the pandemic has helped you. For us students, it's been really tough for us.
I can imagine. Yeah.
yeah, but it's good to know that we still have people who are enthusiastic about creating content, especially people like you, authors, or generally creative people, because that is more useful in the pandemic, right? Like, you want something to keep you entertained. So actually, next question for
Miss Cassidy.
Miss Cassidy.
So as you mentioned that your books are based on relationships and the bond between family, has your family influenced your writing in any manner?
That's quite interesting too. I think families are really important, and I don't just mean your immediate family. But families can be all shapes and sizes. They can be people who aren't related to you by blood. It can be people perhaps that you've chosen, you know, so a family made of friends could be your family if you need it to be. But I do think that we're all made by our families to some extent. We're all the product of the way that we've been brought up, and also we go on to make our own families, and that's quite interesting. And it, you know, I have to admit, I have borrowed characters from my families in certain stories. In Sunday Girl, for example, a book I showed you before, the one that I'm reading out at the moment on YouTube, that's the granddad in this story is very, very like my dad. There are a lot of details from my life in here, in a way. There's like, it's based in the city that I grew up in, right down to the Afghan hound, the funny dog that we had when I was a teenager. So many little details. And my dad did read this book, and he said, oh, I don't know about this one. I'm not sure about him. Is he meant to be me? You know, and I'm like, sorry. Not really. You know, he isn't. It's not my dad, but it's the physical description and so on is very, very like it. And he's just as eccentric as my dad was. And I've used my son and my daughter as well in a book called Driftwood. When they were teenagers, they're very close together in age. There's just like 16 months between them. And we lived in Scotland at that time, and they went to a very small primary school and a very small secondary school where they had the same, they were always in the same class, and they had the same friends. And you know, and then disaster struck, you know, when my son was about 13 and my daughter was about 12. He started going out with her best friend, and she was absolutely outraged. And it wasn't much of a going out, you know, but it was just like, you know, very innocent, but still. she was so horrified, and I wrote the book Driftwood is about a girl whose brother goes out with her best friend, and lots of the little details of the brother and sister in that story come from my kids, and I did it kind of as a almost as a present for them, but also to make them laugh, because it's like, and I think they have forgiven me for it now, just about.
Well, would you say this makes your characters more organic, or more, is it easier to write because they are influenced by your family, or maybe even a friend?
No, I think if you know that there's a thread, if you know there's a little kernel of real person in your character, it actually, in a way, it makes you a bit more careful, because you can't make them too like that person. It can't be too much like that person, because it's fiction, and the person might be hurt or offended or upset, or might get the wrong idea, so most of my characters are pretty much 100% imaginary, but those were 3 cases where the physical description of the characters was quite close, and some of the little incidents of things that they did were borrowed. But I did it with people. I did it with 3 people I knew would understand and would just think it was funny, So normally you can't really. I think it's much easier to create a character from scratch and pull it from your imagination rather than try to base it on a real person. That way, trouble lies often.
Well, thank you so much. That was a really cool answer. So for Mr. Doyle, the next question is about Indian authors. So do you believe that Indian authors, or maybe any authors from any other place where English is not their native language, if they write primarily in English, do you think that they are typecast a bit by critics or even by the public? And in such a situation, how would you encourage them to keep going?
So I think almost all Indian authors would be writing in a language in English, which is not usually the first language, and from that perspective, I don't think there's too much. That I don't see any commentary from critics because of that. I don't see that at all as a problem. In fact, there are some Indian authors who've written outstanding books despite English being a second language for them. So I don't really see this as an issue as such. I can't speak for authors outside India. I don't know too many authors outside India who are writing in a language which is not their native tongue. But definitely in India, I don't see this as something that matters at all.
Okay. So maybe not just in terms of facing criticism for being Indian, but just like maybe any other form of criticism which an author may face, maybe because of age, maybe because of the fact that there aren't a lot of books in that field, or the fact that they're trying to do something very different in their books. So just any criticisms that an author might face. Maybe it's from critics, maybe it's from the readers, it might even be from their friends or family, but then how do you encourage them to take those criticisms and keep going?
So I think it would be a little presumptuous of me to encourage anyone, but I can talk about how I've been encouraged by other authors when I made my debut, because it was a struggle, as it is for most authors, and I had these very well-known names who are good friends now. I mean, over the years we've become friends, who were very solidly behind me. They helped me with my first contract. They told me what to look out for, what not to look out for. I would actually go and call them up and say, this is what I'm being offered. Is it worth taking up? I switched publishers after my first book, and one of these big names, he was a very big name, he still is a big name at that time. He was very, very helpful in encouraging me to make the switch, because he said it's good for your future. The only publisher who accepted my first book was a very small publisher, so the reach was limited. And when the big guys approached me after the first book did well, so he said, do it. And I think there's a lot of, in the fraternity, there's a lot of encouragement for each other. I keep getting asked this question in the context of some of the authors who write similar, if not the same genre. Amish and Ashwin come to mind, and they say, you guys compete. But actually we don't. We actually pretty good friends. When we get together on a panel, for example, we have a blast. We're just laughing and joking with each other. So I think there's a lot of encouragement there there's a lot of solidarity, shall I say.
Yeah. So do you believe that this competition, or if it exists, competition with other authors, or maybe even friendship with other authors, do you believe that it helps you, or is it a good thing, or is it better to have more competition with each other in the field?
Well, it's good to have competition. I mean, there's no doubt about that, but healthy competition. So you see someone come up with someone acing a story, and you say, man, I wish I could have written that, and then obviously you want to try and do better. And given the fact that a lot of us, or at least 2 or 3 of us, have a very strong overlap in terms of readers. They're the same readers. If you ask them who are your favorite authors, all of us will be there.
Yeah.
So given that there is a competition in terms of writing good stories, which I think is very good, because it helps you to up your game. Otherwise, you tend to get complacent if you think, and then you start getting arrogant as well, and you say, I'm the best, no one can touch me. But here you've got these guys who are writing really well, and then you're also watching their sales and saying, they sold that much more. My next book's going to sell as much. So it's very healthy and it's very good.
Yeah. Well, thank you.
Competition definitely is a treat for the readers as such, because we love your stories.
So we get to see one really good book, then we get to see an even better one. Then from the first author, we get to see an even better one. So for the readers, it's always amazing. So again, for both of you, so as authors, we'd assume that reading books plays a pretty big role in your life. So growing up, what were your favorite books to read, and how have they influenced your writing today? So let's start with you, Miss Cassidy.
When I was growing up, we didn't have a lot of books in the house. We didn't really have any books in the house. Wasn't an awful lot of money to spare for things like that. But when I was 7 years old, I was given a library ticket. My teacher took the whole class, about 40 children, through several streets, across several main roads to the local library. And we were all the librarian read us a story and gave us all a library ticket. And that evening at tea, my mum and dad said, what did you do at school today? And I said, look, I got a library ticket. And my dad was a really keen reader, and he took me back that evening after tea. We walked back up to that library, and he showed me how it all worked, and that you could just pick a book off the shelf. So I actually read really widely as a child and as a teenager, but it was 99% from libraries. And that was a brilliant start, because libraries are great. It's a no risk thing. You can pick any book off the shelf, and if you don't like it and it doesn't suit you, you just take it back the next week and you haven't lost anything. So I'm still a real fan of libraries, but now in adult life, I absolutely adore buying books, and I've spent a lot of time trying to find the books that I read as a child in the same editions, the ones with the same covers and everything. So I am a terrible collector of old books now. But I read a lot of classics. I read a lot of kind of traditional children's stories. I read fantasy and sci-fi and all sorts of genres that I probably wouldn't choose to read now. But I loved it, and I think it really helps to read widely. I think you're especially as a would-be author, or as someone who loves creating characters and stories yourself, you get to try on different voices, different characters, different styles of writing by reading in that way. But I suppose if I was going to pick one favorite book from childhood, it would probably be a book called Watership Down, which is about the adventures of a big bunch of rabbits. which sounds very dodgy, but it's actually not for small children at all. It's actually scary and dramatic and a bit bloodthirsty and all of those things. It's by an author called Richard Adams, and the reason I've picked that one is it's the first book that I was actually given, that I, you know, first proper book that I owned, and I was 12 years old and I loved it. And I remember taking it to school and reading it secretly, and our school was a little bit rough and tough around the edges at times. And I remember reading it like this in the corner of the corridor with my hand over the cover, so no one would see the picture of the big embarrassing rabbit's face on the cover of this book. So I'm 12, you know, I'm in secondary school and people might laugh. And the coolest boy in our year walked up to me and he goes, "What are you reading?" And I'm like, "Oh, no." And I went really the crimson colour. I was so embarrassed. And I had no choice but to show him the book with the dodgy rabbit's face. And he said, "Watership Down is the best book I've ever read." And that was great for me, because it meant I'd made a new friend who loved reading as much as I did. And also I learned a really big lesson that day. Reading is cool, end of story. So, yeah, that book, always.
Sir, what were your favorite books as a child, and how have they influenced your writing today?
So, so growing up, I think I probably read every book I could lay my hands on. It's a very wide variety of genres. From, you know, so there was what was at that point in time in India the traditional, you know, English set, which was as a child you'd read Enid Blyton, and
We
she
did
was
too.
very prolific, right? So there was lots of Enid Blyton as a young child, and then while growing up, I got very interested in fantasy. So Tolkien, Isaac Asimov, science fiction, Jules Verne, A.G. Wells. These were in school. These were the books that I read, and I guess my whole you know, my inclination towards bringing science in, even though that's not something that I studied or specialized in academically, probably came from this, you know, the books that I read by these authors, and there was mystery. I would read mystery stories. On the flip side, there were the classics, you know, and I love Shakespeare, still do, which was very, very odd, you know, in growing up in India. It was very useful when we started studying, say, Shakespeare in the final years of school, because I'd read the plays before. So I was the guy who would, you know, be answering questions in class, and they're looking very embarrassed because everyone is looking and saying, "Show off," you know. I say, "I read the thing before, you know, what do I do?" But it was good fun. So Thomas Hardy, Walter Scott, these were the kind of books that I grew up reading in school and college, and I think there seems to have been some sort of inclination towards action as well, which is why I probably write thrillers and mystery, you know, the suspense thrillers that I write nowadays. So definitely there's been an impact and influence of all these genres, these writers on my writing today.
Well, thank you so much for your answer. And I think before we conclude, we'd like to ask one last question. What is your advice to an aspiring writer who might be a student or a young author who is just beginning and wants to write books? Ms. Cassidy, we'll start with you.
Okay. My advice would be to read everything that you can get your hands on, and also start to write even a little bit every day. And I mean, write for yourself at home, not at school. So something that you're doing because you want to do it, and it could be as small as a little bit written in a diary, or it could be as big as a novel that you're trying to write. It could be anything, but something every day, a little bit. and don't be scared to try the voices of whatever book you're reading. You know, if you're reading Christopher's book this week, try writing in the style of Christopher. If you're reading my book, write in the style of Cathy Cassidy. It doesn't matter. You're trying out different techniques and different voices, and your own voice will come. But what matters is to just keep reading and keep writing, and slowly the experience. It's like anything that you want to do and you want to be good at, you've got to practice. So put the time in, put the effort in, and eventually, you will get your own voice, and it will start to work for you. That's my best advice. And believe in yourself as well. Don't listen to the critics who say, no, you can't do it. You know, whether that's your teacher or your mom or whoever, just believe in yourself. That matters a lot.
So my advice to any aspiring writer would be twofold. So the first part is exactly what Cathy said. Read everything you can, and I would go as far as to say that read stuff that you may think you won't like reading as well. It just gives you additional exposure. You'll read authors whose styles you may not be comfortable with, and you'll say, and it helps you to, as Cathy said, it helps you to develop your own voice, your own style, which is uniquely yours. It's not something that you're imitating then, it comes. So reading is definitely very important. And the second thing I would very, very strongly recommend to any aspiring author is to persevere. And persevere not just in writing, but persevere also in getting published. It's a very competitive world there. It's extremely difficult to get published. You have to be prepared to take the knocks, the rejections, because if you go there with stars in your eyes and saying, I write well, people like reading my stories, you may write brilliantly. But most authors who are successful today will say the same thing in terms of their experience. They would have been rejected again and again and again and again. And you just have to keep going and have faith in yourself and say, I can do it. And if you have that faith, if you persevere, it will happen. So that's something that I would very, very strongly recommend.
I'm sure that most of the aspiring writers in the audience would be immensely pleased with your advice. So finally, is there anything that you would like to ask each other before we conclude? Are there any important questions that we missed out that you would like to ask each other?
Or ask us?
I'd like to see whether Christopher's books are available in the UK, because although they're not my usual style, I would love to read them. They sound great. I'm very into mythology and history, not so much the science, but they sound great. So I'd love it if they were available for British readers to devour.
They are available. They're not available in bookstores, but you'll get them on Amazon UK.
No, I'll find them. That's brilliant. Thank you. That's lovely.
Thank you. That's very nice of you.
And it's been so lovely listening to somebody else's take on the whole author, I just think it's so interesting. And I think if there's anything to ask you two as well, the girls, I just think you are so brilliant steering this and trying to keep us two under control. You're brilliant. Thank you ever so much. And everybody watching and listening, I think you're amazing. Keep doing whatever it is you do, whatever it is you care about, whether it's reading, writing, something else completely, just keep on keeping on. So.
Well, thank you so much for your answers. And Mr. Doyle, sorry, is there anything you would like to ask Ms. Cassidy?
Well, I think some of my questions have been answered when my daughter told me about, one of the things she said was, Cathy Cassidy is so amazing at knowing exactly how relationships are, between friends, and so she's obviously seeing the reality in there. And I was very curious about how it came out. And I think I thank you for all your answers today, Cathy, because I think there was a lot of enlightenment for me as well. I think it's always a good learning experience to see how another author approaches development of characters, development of relationships. Those are the most difficult things, at least for me, to make them realistic, so that people are not reading the book and saying, this does not sound right. This is not how it works. I mean, you can't go around giving advice like that. But it's great to hear where that's coming from. So thank you. I think a lot of my questions have been answered. It was great to hear that. And I just want to say thank you to both you, Hishni and Rohini. You did an awesome job in terms of moderating the discussion and making sure that we both got time to speak.
Yeah.
Because as authors, I find, at least as an author myself, I'm not going to speak for Cathy, but I can run away with the time. I can start talking a lot about a lot of things. And
so yes, thank you so much for joining us today. And just before we conclude, finally, we'd just like to ask you, we request you to let us know if there's any part of what you said or what we asked that you might be uncomfortable with, because this is a recorded session, so we can cut it out of the final cut. So if there's anything that you don't want to feature in the final cut, then please let us know.
I'm fine. I think it was lovely. You were brilliant, and I've really, really enjoyed it. And thanks for your patience as well in waiting for me to work out how to actually get onto the event. But yeah, it's been lovely.
Same here. Same. It's been. I thoroughly enjoyed the entire session, and thank you, Cathy. Thank you to both of you for making this such an enjoyable interaction.
Yeah, I wish you all well for whatever it is you do in the future, girls, and Christopher as well. Absolutely.
Thank you so much, Cathy. Wish you all the best, and Hishni and Rohini, wish you all the best as well.
Thank you, sir. Thank you. This has been another episode of Carpe Diem, which is brought to you with love by Festember in association with Cry India. Before we end, the Cry donation is up on all our social media handles. Do your part and donate today to provide a safe and fulfilling childhood to every child that deserves it, regardless of their background and stature. So please do check it out and contribute whatever little you can to make a big difference in someone's life.
So, Mr. Doyle and Ms. Cassidy, it has been a pleasure to talk to you and to learn about your experiences as authors, as well as your views and perspectives on life in general. We wish you both all the best for future endeavors and hope that we can keep in touch. Thank you so much for joining us here at Festember.
Not all dreams stay just dreams forever. Not all doors only await you. Because when the dream of owning a house comes true, only Bank of Baroda shows the way through. Not everyone, but they know what we feel. The pleasure is real, and that's why it's all about home.